After a chance encounter, a cab driver and a supermodel begin an intense affair that changes their lives. One morning, Michael rises from bed, does his breathing exercises, and continues his unique routine by waving a small white flag in front of the bathroom mirror. Meanwhile, Philippe tries to initiate intimacy with his wife, Sarah, and when she doesn't engage, asks if she'll ever make love to him again. The woman assures her husband that she loves him, but when he repeats the question, she doesn't respond. Concurrently, Michael gets dressed and calls up a diner to order his usual breakfast for delivery. Minutes later, he opens the door to receive the food and today's paper. Later that day, Sarah, a supermodel, gets hounded by paparazzi and fans outside a restaurant, and she politely gives them a few seconds of her time before hailing a cab. She gets in the vehicle and tells Michael, the cab driver, where she'd like to go. The man recognizes the woman and she indifferently brushes him off as just another driver. So, he confidently proclaims that he's the type of guy who sends a woman 1,000 roses to her hotel room or flies to the other end of the world just to see her smile. Sarah scoffs and says he'd be the type of guy looking to get his heart broken. Michael counters that he never falls in love, and she says this time he would. When they reach the destination, the cab driver gets out of the vehicle and asks the model out on a date. However, she just smiles and says goodbye. Before getting back inside the cab, the man sees the hair tie she left behind in the back seat, grabs it, and gives it a sniff. That evening, Michael has dinner with his friends Sally and Robin. The bespectacled woman says she expects the other two to attend her Episcopalian ordination that weekend because it's part of her senior thesis, where she'll hopefully become a priest. Suddenly, the man sees Sarah passing by and runs out of the restaurant. When the model sees him, she tells her friends that she'll walk home instead of joining them in the cab. While on a stroll, the woman mentions that she's married, and he calmly brushes it off and says he doesn't mind because he'll patiently wait until she falls in love with him. The model hails a cab and insists they ran into each other again by accident and that there won't be a next time, but he disagrees. The next day, Michael's friends have a hard time believing he just happened to meet the supermodel in his cab, and that she also coincidentally appeared outside the restaurant last night. He tells the women that they don't need to worry about him getting his heart broken because she's married, but the skeptical Sally shares her concern that he might not know what he's getting himself into. So Michael shares that he doesn't even have Sarah's phone number and believes he might not even see her again. The next day, the cab driver happens upon the model hanging outside a women's correctional facility. She curiously watches the inmates kissing their lovers through the bars and says she finds it fascinating. When the woman moves to get in the back seat, Michael tells her to sit in front, and she obliges. In his apartment, the cab driver pins the woman against the fridge and kisses her passionately. She adamantly says she won't sleep with him, so he pleasures her in a different way while whispering into her ear. Overwhelmed by everything that's happening, Sarah pushes Michael off her and runs out of the apartment. Later, the model hears the fax machine beeping and finds a romantic poem the man wrote for her. The next day, Sally admonishes Robin for condoning their friend's actions with a married woman. However, he barely listens to their conversation because he's busy checking his voicemail for a message from Sarah regarding the poem he sent her. Eventually, he hears the model's appreciative response and takes it as an invitation to see each other again. Later, Michael sneaks into a fashion show and watches the model strutting down the runway. When she spots him in the audience, she smiles and motions for him to meet her backstage. Even though she asked him out for a cup of tea, he takes her back to his apartment where they make love right after they enter the door. Because neither one of them enjoyed the experience, they agree that it might be because it was their first time together. Later, Sarah emphasizes that she'll never leave her husband for the cab driver, and she hopes he realizes that. However, Michael proposes several ideas regarding how they should go forward with their relationship. Although he prefers one wherein they continue the affair while her husband spends the next 2 months in Europe, she says that it's best if they remain good friends and never sleep together again. That evening, they have dinner at a diner where Sarah says she's eating the best burger she's ever had. When she returns to her apartment, she checks the fax machine and finds another poem from the cab driver. That weekend, while on their way to Robin's ordination, Sarah asks Michael where he learned how to write. Instead of answering her question, he jokes that whoever sends her the poems just has a crush on her. Before the ceremony, the cab driver introduces Sally to the supermodel. After the event, Robin asks the others what they thought about the ritual. Sarah says it blew her away because she identified with a struggle with life, love, and God. She adds that she thinks more people should see it, and her high praise endears the man's friends to toward her. While the model's in the restroom, the friends admit how much they like her and how she isn't as uptight as they thought she'd be. They also point out that they can see how much Sarah likes him just based on how she looks at him. Just before she returns to the table, Michael reveals that she and the woman made love last night. Later that evening, Sarah shares she was worried his friends might think she was dumb, and reveals she wanted to be a veterinarian before becoming a model. Then, she asks why he chooses to be a cab driver even though he's such a talented writer. So he says he's grateful for his job because he learned a lot in the last 10 years he's been doing it. In her apartment, her phone rings and she answers a call from Philippe. After hearing the gushy words the model utters through the phone, the cab driver goes to the bathroom and smells her perfume. Minutes later, Sarah follows Michael to the loft and ends the call. When he says he'd better leave, she asks him to stay, and they share a kiss. Suddenly, the model pushes him to the floor, ties up his hands over his head, covers his face with his shirt, and they make love. After the deed, the man heads to the kitchen to grab a snack from the fridge. Hours later, he slowly gets out of bed so as not to disturb the sleeping woman. Then, he leaves a handwritten poem and a box of chocolates next to her. The next morning, Sarah calls Michael, and he explains that even though he wanted to wake up next to her, he says it felt weird, which is why he left in the middle of the night. The woman understands his reasoning and adds that she called because she just wanted to tell him that she misses him. Later, Sally and Robin ask the cab driver for intimate details regarding what happened last night. However, the man refuses to elaborate, especially since the bespectacled woman's mother is at the table with them. That evening, Sarah and Michael hang out at the latter's apartment and order food delivery from several restaurants. When the food arrives, they hungrily open the packages on the living room floor and eat. The model remarks that she doesn't mind paying her share whenever they buy food, but the man insists that he's paying for everything whenever they go on a date. He asks how much money she makes in a day, and she says $250,000, so he jokes that she only makes a little bit more than he does. After the meal, the cab driver wonders if she kept the receipts from their orders, and she asks why. Then, he teases that they could use it to refute the tabloid stories insinuating that the model suffers from an eating disorder, making her laugh. Moments later, Michael asks if they can finally make gentle love, unlike the previous times they've done before. So they move to the bed and do the deed surrounded by candlelight. Then, the model mentions that she needs to go to Spain tomorrow to see her husband. She says she'll be alone in Barcelona for the weekend, and she'll meet up with Philippe in Madrid. The cab driver expresses how much he'll miss her, so she assures that she'll only be gone for a week. When Michael asks her to spend the night, she sighs and says that even if she'd like to, doing so just makes everything seem so real. The next day, the cab driver and Sally cheer on Robin as she marches on stage to receive her diploma. When the friends ask if he'll join them for lunch, he says he can't because he's been slacking off work lately and needs to drive his cab, especially now that Sarah's in Spain for a week. Meanwhile, in the hotel room, the model finds a lone rose on the doorknob. When she enters the room, she sees 1,000 roses all over the space, and she remembers what Michael said in the cab the first time they met. Then, the maid explains that they had to fly the flowers from the Canary Islands because there weren't enough roses in Barcelona. Later, she leaves Michael a voicemail saying that he's the craziest, most passionate man she's ever met, and that she's sad he can't be there with her to see how beautiful the roses are. The next day, the model arrives in her husband's suite in Madrid, and he says he just got done reading about the 1,000 roses he supposedly sent to her room yesterday. So Sarah points out that the same news articles also said they went to dinner with famous designers last night, and remarks that these journalists always make stuff up. He wonders if the flowers have anything to do with why she doesn't seem happy to see him. To appease Philippe, Sarah insists that she's ecstatic to finally see her husband, but he doesn't believe her. Then, he throws his coffee cup on the floor and asks if she's sleeping with someone else. She denies his allegations and throws the same question at him. Eventually, he admits that he slept with 2 different women in the last year, but also brings up the fact that his wife never wants to make love anymore. Furious, Sarah says she's tired of being the man's arm candy and always having to be at the same trendy places in New York and Europe. She asks why they can't just order Chinese food, sit on the floor, and talk about God. Philippe doesn't know what she's talking about and suggests they take a vacation to Bali to work things out. When she exasperatedly says that she doesn't know what she wants right now, he emphasizes that even though he enjoys the superficial things in life, he's never seen her as just a prize, but as a woman he loves and the person he wants to spend the rest of his life with. Because she can't forgive him quite yet for his admitted infidelity, Philippe says he'll give his wife wife some time and space to figure out how they should move forward with their marriage. Days later, Michael stops by the woman's apartment to hand the maid a gift he'd like her to receive at the airport. When she returns to New York, an airport employee gives the model the box. In the limousine, Sarah opens the gift and finds chocolate and handwritten notes. Later, she reads the poems while soaking in the bathtub, then leaves the cab driver a message that she'd like to see him as soon as possible. The next day, she checks her voicemail, but there aren't any from Michael. Soon, the man stops by the apartment and scoops her up in his arms. That night, Michael admits he didn't like that Sarah was away for so long. She shares that she cut the buds off from the flowers in Barcelona, brought them back with her to New York, and sprinkled the petals into her bath last night. Minutes later, he invites her to dance with him in the middle of the restaurant, and they share a kiss. After spending the entire day together, the model suggests they go to a restaurant to eat. Inside, Michael recognizes the manager and says he went to college with his wife. The man asks if he's a writer as well, but he says he's a cab driver. Suddenly, Sarah doesn't feel like staying in the establishment and says she'd rather eat someplace else. In the cab, the model says she knows he doesn't like going to the trendy places that she wants to go. Confused, Michael explains he doesn't mind eating at the places she suggests, but she suddenly admits that she doesn't always want to eat Chinese food while sitting on the floor at his apartment. Seconds later, Sarah asks why he keeps lying to her about being a writer. He scoffs and thinks the novelty of sleeping with a bohemian cab driver finally wore off for the supermodel. So she reiterates that he doesn't know the first thing about her life, and their relationship hasn't been reality. The man counters that everything they feel for each other has been real and she can't deal with it. Eventually, Michael reveals that he wrote a book, The Blameless, that was on the bestseller list 10 years ago. He adds that he knows exactly what her life is like because he flew all over the world and rubbed shoulders with the rich and famous. However, he realized he didn't like any of it, so he took the money, came back home to New York, and chose to become a cab driver. Sarah doesn't think his explanation is enough to forgive him for withholding an essential part of his life from her, and she calls him selfish. In her apartment, the cab driver apologizes, and they make amends. Then, they head to the man's place, and after making love, she says she'd like to spend the night and wake up in his arms. The next day, Michael wakes up and realizes the model's no longer there. Meanwhile, Sarah hears the phone ringing, but instead of answering, she hurriedly packs her bags, preparing to leave for a long trip. Later, the cab driver rushes to the airport, and when he doesn't see the woman there, realizes she's already on the flight to Paris. Soon, the model arrives in her husband's hotel room and they share a kiss, implying a reconciliation. That evening, Michael, who took the next flight to Paris, finds the couple exiting a restaurant surrounded by paparazzi. When the model spots the cab driver, she wordlessly pleads that he let her go. Heartbroken, Michael cries in the middle of the street, while the woman wipes her tears away as she stares out the car window. The next day, Sarah sees a gift on the table in their hotel room. Inside, she finds the cab driver's book and the very last poem he'll ever write her, one where he finally professes his love. Meanwhile, Michael decides he no longer wants to be a cab driver and returns to writing full-time.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.